Hello, my name is Sasha Farbach, and I'm now joined by James Sherr, who is Honorary Fellow at International Center for Defense and Security in Tallinn, to talk all about Russia and much, much more. Thank you so much for taking the time.
It's a pleasure being back in Poland.
So on the subject of Poland, the idea of deterrence, deterring Russia, I mean, that's not just important for Poland, that's important for the collective West.
Yes.
We talked earlier, and you're talking about we've lost this culture of deterrence. So explain to us what you mean by that. What is deterrence in your mind?
I mean, obviously, deterrence is the art of convincing an adversary that any step he takes that is unacceptable to you is going to have even more unacceptable consequences for him. But it's best, as far as losing the culture, best explained by example. During the Cold War, on the inner German border between the two Germanys, there were over 160 border violations by the Soviet forces stationed in Germany and the East German NVA. And on each occasion, NATO responded to send a clear message. Even if you cross over here and cut down 2 trees, you are attacking NATO, and we will respond accordingly. Now, fast forward to the summer of 2015, when in the middle of a well-publicized NATO-Georgia military exercise, the Russians moved the border of South Ossetia 1.5 kilometers. The response was that the exercise ended on schedule, and there was no public response at all. That shows you what has changed and what we have lost.
So some would look at that and say it's weakness now that prevails in that. What's missing here?
It communicates weakness. That's the point. Whether we are weak or not is a second point. Let's fast forward again to 2021. Unprovable assumption. I think we had a very good chance of deterring this war, which became fully kinetic in February 2022. But everything we signaled was the opposite. The Russians had come to the conclusion by the end of 2020, after so many years of frustrations and ups and downs, that the Ukraine problem could only be solved through war. But they didn't know whether it would be safe. Biden had just come to office. He came to office saying, the days are over when the United States will roll over in response to aggressive adversaries. And so what happened? The Russians proceeded throughout that year to test him. In my judgment, I'm not alone. I'm in the minority. The administration failed every one of those tests. Didn't even notice some of them. They came thick and fast. And the result was that the Russians came to a clear conclusion by the end of 2021. The United States and the West as a whole is neither willing to talk to us on our basis, meaning making talk about making the major changes in the European security order that we demand, and which they sometimes described as an ultimatum, nor did the West demonstrate that they were prepared to stop Russia. And so on the basis of that, they went to war.
If we look now, interesting that you point out these incursions, and there have now also been plenty in the last 2 years. Russia testing certain defenses, but it's also going in a certain way that seems far more aggressive, potentially even, than it has been in the past. But it does also show that NATO, at least what we hear publicly, isn't responding in the same sort of context. I'm just curious what you think about those recent, really close calls with the missiles that landed on the eastern flank, some that violated Polish airspace. The response, again, some would say wasn't strong enough. Is that another sign of weakness there?
Look at the whole context, and it's very worrying. What we are looking at are what in military terms are regarded as grey zone activities. Not obviously, well, often they are obviously attributable actions, but you can't necessarily conclusively prove them, particularly to countries that adopt standards of proof that are upheld by the Crown Prosecution Service in the UK or the New York Bar Association. Everyone knew, for example, everyone knows, when GPS systems are being disrupted, affecting commercial flights in the Baltic region, everyone knows which Russian facilities are doing that. It doesn't mean you can necessarily prove it to the outside world, but we have enough knowledge to know where that's coming from, and quite quickly. But to move back one or two steps, we are not simply talking about a comprehensive and aggressive disinformation campaign. We are talking about what the Russians call informationная война, information war. It's not disinformation. It includes disinformation. It's also penetration. It's intimidation. It's disruption. It's destabilization. It's sabotage. It's assassination. All of these things have been taking place. And what have the responses been? Even amongst ourselves, we are talking about talking. We are talking about what to do instead of doing something. The accumulation of this absence of responses, even when it's perfectly plain what is taking place and why it is taking place, is sending very worrying messages that we are fragmented, we are unsure of ourselves, we do not have collective confidence, and we are weak.
Mm-hmm. Also, on the jamming note, as you said, I mean, there have been some very close calls in the last months.
Because these are also dangerous actions, yes.
Exactly. And these miscalculations where something could go wrong and could go wrong very badly.
Yes.
I believe it was the now nearly former NATO Secretary General, Mr. Stoltenberg, who said that any kind of attack on critical infrastructure would constitute an activation of Article 5. The jury is still out. What happened to those pipelines in the Baltic Sea?
Why is it out?
Well, so you differ in that. But anyway, my point is we have these instances. But where's NATO's response?
Well, that's the question I am raising. Some time ago, one would have presumed we understood that there is a border between NATO and Russia, many borders, and that Russia has no business conducting hostile actions inside NATO, whether they are legally acts of war or not. And they have to be stopped. Now, it would be a very simple matter in response to a GPS attack, an attack on GPS systems, to launch a disabling strike against the Russian facility doing it. Yet that hasn't happened. It sends a message that hasn't happened. Well, some would say if you do that, launch a cyber operation against a facility in Russia, in Kaliningrad Oblast, or outside Narva. Well, that's risky. Yes, it's risky. But deterrence involves demonstrating that in defense of our own territory, of course we will take risks. We will take far bigger risks than that. But be advised that if you undertake such actions here, and one can add to this, setting fire to factories producing munitions for Ukraine, conducting a whole raft of probably 100, 150 non-lethal acoustic weapons attacks on government officials, particularly those who are working in support of Ukraine and have been working in the past in support of Georgia. If you do these things, the consequences for you are going to be extremely unpleasant.
So on that note, we will conclude it there on saying that we must rebuild, or NATO and the West must rebuild, a culture of deterrence. James, thank you so much
Thanks
for that.
a lot.
Really appreciate it. And that was Sasha Farbach for TVP World. Thank you for watching.